What's up everyone, it's Q from Retro Q Gaming, and I want to weigh in on something that is not so much a controversial topic, but it's definitely an important topic when it comes to retro gaming and people who play retro games, etc, etc. And that main topic that is kind of divisive is original hardware and what is the importance of original hardware. Some people will only specifically play on original hardware. Some people don't care and will play on whatever's newest, whatever's easiest, an emulator, a clone console, a ROM, whatever. Or some people will play on both, depending on the situation. Now, if you're longtime fans, you already know that I am a big retro gamer. I love the actual physical side of it. I love the physical discs, the physical cartridges, whatever it is, the actual consoles themselves. That's all my preferred way to play. But I'm not completely against using other ways to play. For example, like I mentioned a minute ago, some people prefer emulators or clone consoles or what would you call them? Updated collections on newer consoles, whatever it is. Let me give you a perfect example. I always have someone, or a couple of people I should say, that bust my ass almost constantly about the stuff I buy. Not because I buy it, because I spend money on it, whatever. A lot of them look at it and they don't understand the appeal of it to me personally. For example, when I bought a SNES Mini, they just responded with, why don't you just download and play it on emulators? When I bought my arcade JAMA cab, they just said to me, why don't you just install MAME and play it from there? So you get my point when it comes to that side of it. But I'm all about the original hardware. Now, like I mentioned a minute ago as well, that's why one of the main reasons why I'm all for original hardware. And the fact that it's the way it's meant to be played. It's designed around that. That's how the hardware, the system, the coding, the gameplay, the sound, the graphics, the visuals, everything about it was designed around that style. Unfortunately, I still don't have a perfect retro gaming setup. Like, I need something really good, like a Sony PVM, which are an absolute nightmare to get a hold of in Ireland. But we can do some good stuff, like get RGB SCARTs and all here, because, well, Europe doing something right for once. And do that in the meantime. I know personally I'm in the process of upgrading some of my cables as it is to upgrade them from either just standard component or whatever, not component, composite, or just standard SCARTs or S-Video, looking to upgrade them to the likes of RGB SCARTs. Or straight up components if I can even get them. And you can get things like those, things like frame meisters, etc, etc. But at the end of the day, nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, will beat old school original hardware connected in through RGB to an actual professional RGB enabled monitor, something like a Sony PVM. You'll get the absolute best possible picture from something like that, and you will get it still delivered in a way that it was originally intended. And that's a big deal to me. You can call it nostalgia, you can call it perfectionism, you can call it purism. Is purism the word? You can call it me being a purist. There you go, that's a better way of wording it. But I realize that this kind of thing, and original hardware and the setups and extra money and all the extra weird components and all, it's not for everyone. And even if you are someone who does game with retro games or whatever, not on original hardware, there's nothing wrong with that. For example, one of my friends is kind of starting to lean to a bit more towards arcade stuff now that he's got to sample my JAMA cab a couple of times. You know, we're there playing Aliens or Ghosts and Goblins or whatever, and he's downloading MAME, he's playing the games on it. That's perfectly fine. Now, we all know, of course, that emulators aren't perfect, which we'll get to now in a second as well. But let me give you another example based on my friend that I spoke of just a second ago. There's a company here in Ireland that will actually sell you a straight up arcade machine. Now, what it realistically is probably just a Raspberry Pi stuck inside an arcade cabinet with a high definition LCD monitor, etc, etc, but it looks like a standard arcade cabinet. And it comes preloaded with 400 and something games. But at the same time, it's still a full-size, freestanding arcade cabinet with two built-in, I was going to call them controllers for a second, two built-in arcade sticks as usual that would look not out of place at all in an arcade. And that sells for just over €1,000. So when you think about it, you could get what is essentially a fully functioning high-definition arcade machine with over 400 games preloaded, and that includes all the major heavy-hitting arcade machine games as well, for just over $1,000. Or you can look back to what I have, which again is original hardware. Cost me a bit under half of that, and realistically at the time only had one game. Now I have more games than that now, obviously. And even when you look at it nowadays, depending on what game you're buying in the actual JAMA PCB, some of those for just a game alone will be 2, 3, 4, €500 if not more. Let alone for the whole cabinet ready to go, all the games preloaded then and there. And I'm not against that, although selling ROMs and emulators is a whole other story, but that's not what I'm talking about in this sense. I'm talking about if someone wants to play on a machine like that. I'm not going to fault them whatsoever. For example, I would actually love a MAME cabinet as well, because one thing is to be said, especially when it comes to arcade machines, and if you don't have a perfect setup for your home consoles as well. If you don't have a perfect ideal setup where you can keep everything connected up all at once to a proper screen and all your cables plugged in so you don't have to be messing around unplugging everything, it can get a bit troublesome and a bit, well, to be frankly honest, it's a bit of a hassle. Arcade boards are a perfect example of this. Most arcade machines, like actual legit arcade machines, will only have space for maybe 1 or 2 boards inside it at a time. These are obviously very big, fragile boards that you really, really want to take care of. So it's a bit unwieldy to unplug 4 or 5 cables from your actual JAMMA board, take it out, be very careful, put it in wherever, and then get your new board or your whatever you're going to replace it with, pop that in, and then connect up 4 or 5 extra connectors just for one game. So I would love to actually have my arcade JAMMA cab, one sitting there with 1 game, 2 games, whatever in it, and then beside it maybe have an actual full-on MAME cab. For those times where I want to randomly just play a game and I want to, maybe someone comes over and we want to randomly do something. Maybe it's a game I don't have, maybe I can't be bothered setting it up one day just for that kind of thing. It's more of a convenience aspect, and from the same convenience aspect, I completely understand why people will install MAME or any other emulators on a PC, on a tablet, on a phone, on a desktop, not a desktop, a set-top box like the Nvidia Shield. I completely understand why people will actually do that. But just before we end up the video here, I am going to go in with one extra little thing that I will actually use in defense of original hardware. I realize I've basically been defending original hardware the entire video, but one extra thing that I feel completely justifies it. So if you're a long-time viewer, you probably know that I mention it all the time, that Secret of Mana on the Super Nintendo is my favorite game of all time. Nothing will ever change that. And because original hardware and the game, how it's originally made, is designed to be played on that hardware and sound perfectly from that hardware, here's my perfect example of why I always use this, and you'll see why. We'll call it something that original hardware can possibly never properly be replicated. There's a whole question about the FPGA stuff. That's up in the air at the moment. We'll see how perfect that turns out to be. But anyway, I digress. So there are a couple of songs in Secret of Mana that when you're playing them, obviously they sound fantastic, the entire soundtrack does, and you hear the entire thing as it's playing. Now, here's something that's very interesting. Obviously that song plays properly on the Super Nintendo. I have the official CD soundtrack for the game as well. Obviously it plays perfectly there. I'd almost argue a little bit better because digital quality CDs and higher mastering and whatnot. But I have yet to come across any emulator whatsoever that can actually play these songs 100% correctly. Now, it's not every single song, but there are several songs in there that when you're playing them on other platforms, emulated digital platforms for example, there are little bits in there that actually miss a couple of beats or miss a little bit of an instrument for a second or two. And you can argue that's almost dodgy emulation, or it might be a poor ROM or a poor emulator or whatever, but let me counter that with this. Every PC-based emulator I've ever tried has obviously had this issue. Even the official Wii download from Nintendo's emulator and Square Enix, even that still doesn't do it correctly. Even the brand new custom written emulator in the Super Nintendo Mini still has that problem. And even the Suikoden Densetsu collection on the Nintendo Switch also has the same problem. Sound emulation is generally a big issue when it comes to, well, emulation on any platform you play on, be it any platform you emulate and any platform that you emulate on. I mean, we've all heard the legendary stories about the at-games Sega Mega Drive stuff and how terrible the sound emulation is for a lot of that. But hey, when you even factor out things like standard definition displays, RGB SCARTs, the design, all that stuff, simply comes down to the music and the fact that some systems, many systems, cannot replicate the actual original sound properly. That's just a game breaker and a deal breaker for me. But anyway, let me know where you stand on it, because remember, if you decide to only play retro games on emulators and MAME and, you know, whatever set-top box you've downloaded on, that's not wrong either. I completely understand that, like I explained here too. I realize that some people may want to exclusively game on retro hardware. Obviously there's problems with that, and there's a whole myriad of problems that can come with it and things to be factored in. Cost, space, reliability, new hardware, cables, convenience, etc. But we all have our own preferences, reasons, and justifications. So let me know all of that, where you sit in the whole situation, what you prefer, what you don't prefer, why not. Leave all that in the comment section below. Hit the appropriate button to let me know how I did on the video, if you liked it or disliked it. Feel free to hit the subscribe button, and I will see you in the rest of the videos in my channel.